The Americans, one of the most influential books within the photography world today. It was a book that consisted of photographs that showed what America was like from the eyes of a man just looking in. This man was Robert Frank, and throughout this presentation, I will be analyzing some of his most known published works and going over the meaning behind them. First, I will begin going over Robert Frank's background. So, beginning with how he became a photographer, he actually got the skill from his father, who was an amateur photographer in Switzerland. It wasn't his main focus, though, because he focused on being a businessman. After gaining this, he started working with Hermann Seegresser right after graduating high school in 1941 to gain experience in photography. A year later, he went on to work with Michael Wollenzinger, which helped him gain connections with Switzerland's Active magazine. By the end of the training with Switzerland's Active magazine, he created his first photography book called 40 Photos, which was published in 1946. After traveling between South America, Peru, Europe, and America for the next couple of years and taking photos, he published some of those photos and was becoming a little bit more well known. He still wasn't pleased with where he was going, though, so in 1954 he applied for the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation for a fellowship and received one in 1955 to tour America taking photos. After this fellowship, he went on to publish one of the most well known photographic books of all time, known as The Americans, which he published in 1958 in Europe and 1959 in America. Later throughout his life, he became more involved in videography and took photos every now and then. He also went to receive the MacDowell Medal in 2002, which is rewarded to only one person a year who has been considered to have made an outstanding contribution to American culture and its arts. Now we'll be going over some of the most famous works that Robert Frank has done throughout his time within photography. So first, it was 40 Photos, which he published in 1946. This just consisted of some of the works he had done while he was doing his training within Switzerland. Next, we have New York, which he published, and those were from the years of 1947 to 1954. This was right before he went on his tour for America. He also published Peru in 1948, Europe in 1949 through 1953, and Black, White, and Things 1952. All of these were just a huge collection of photos he took while traveling throughout those years. Next, the Guggenheim trip of 1955 through 1957 was a big collection of all of the photos he had been taking throughout the entire fellowship that he had gained. Then he published The Americans, which he had taken photos from 1955 through 1957 and published the work on 1958 in Europe and 1959 in America. This was a consistence of 88 photos that he had taken throughout his fellowship that he felt went really well together to kind of give a really great representation of how he saw America. Then he went on to take photos and publish a book in 1958 called From the Bus. Then he went on to photographs and film from 1959 through 1980. This is when he kind of started moving over to videography and put photographs kind of on the side. And then later in life, he went out and did New York and Nova Scotia from 1971 to 2005. Now that I have gone over some of his works, I will now be going to show you three of his most well-known published collections of photos. First, I will begin with 40 Photos. This collection focuses on what is seen and done within Switzerland in everyday life. It gives an overall take of some of the things that Robert Frank has been doing or noticed was a big part of the culture while living in Switzerland. Another collection that got a lot of attention was New York, which consisted of photos he had taken right after he had moved to America from Switzerland. These photos focused more on the life in a city. He brought up issues in his photos such as getting around in taxis and the rise of blackface during those times. The photos began to give a glimpse of what Robert Frank saw America was like when he first arrived. Lastly, I will be going over his most well-known published photographic book, The Americans. This book was very controversial when it first came out because the photos really brought a light to some of the most political issues at the time, such as racism. It was also seen as controversial because most people considered the book to show America in a negative light. However, this book really incorporated how Robert Frank saw America after traveling the country for 2 years. Now that I have given you a glimpse of what some of his book collections were about, I will now be going in depth about what these photos really meant. Beginning with New York, I have chosen these two photos because they are very similar yet different at the same time. These two photos I feel brought up two analytical perspectives mentioned by Lester in the book Visual Communications, Images with Messages. The first would be the technical perspective. The reason I see this perspective being used is due to the light in both photos. They both have light coming from behind the person, which keeps the person's identity hidden. This seems to be used in order to keep the main focus on what they are doing. This leads me to the next perspective, cultural. This one is being seen because at the time, not many people had cars, especially in a bigger city. So by placing two photos, one of a person getting ready to drive and another walking in the rain, it gives a great representation of how people got around back then. Now I'll be analyzing two photos from the book The Americans. Robert Frank did an excellent job of highlighting some of the most important issues going on during this time period. By using Lester's analytical perspectives, one that is clearly being seen is the historical perspective. This would be shown within the first photograph, where the white people are sitting in the front of the bus and the black are sitting towards the back. Another perspective is the critical perspective seen in the photo on the right. The way the photo is presented, with everything being white except for the nurse's skin, truly brings out emotion of what it was like during those times. The baby's face shows an emotion that gives off entitlement, while the nurse looks almost content. It immediately catches your eye and makes you realize what is going on during those times of racism. Now that I have analyzed a few of Robert Frank's photos, I will go in depth with one photo to really get in detail some of the consistent similarities that are seen throughout his work. The photo I'll be concentrating on is the one presented, which was taken in Reno, Nevada, published in his book The Americans. The photo caught my eye because most of his work is very serious and powerful. However, this photo gave us a look at some of the happiness that he saw within America as well. I like how he kept the two people within the center of the photo, and them embracing each other so closely gives off the idea they are in love. However, I would have liked her looking up because with her looking towards the ground, it seems as if she is almost not wanting to show her tallness compared to the man. Another thing I noticed was her right arm is down holding a purse, and I felt that it would have been up holding him would have really encompassed more of the idea that they were in love. For my photo, I decided to go ahead and keep the two people placed within the center of the photo, but by having the girl's arm embracing his and standing fully up, I feel it really shows her excitement and love for the man behind her. I will say that my photo doesn't look as natural, however, I feel that it does give off more of the passion and love that was also seen during the times of when the photos for the book The Americans were being taken. It also brings more happiness into the book The Americans compared to the more serious photos. Now that I have gone over them individually, together you can see a difference between the two. However, I feel they are very compatible with the message they are giving off. I do feel that the photo on the left, the couple is closer together, but the things I mentioned that the women are doing sort of take away from the overall look. As for my picture on the right, I feel by having them still centered and embracing each other, it contributes more to the happiness and love factor. Overall, Robert Frank did a great job of what he was trying to do and have people perceive with his photo. Hopefully, throughout this presentation, you were able to get a glimpse of why Robert Frank has had such an influence on the photography world and have began to appreciate his work more like I have. To close, I would like to end with a quote. There is one thing photography must contain, the humanity of the moment. Robert Frank.